Alright guys, welcome back to this tutorial. So now that we have done the basics of triggers, you might be wondering how exactly do you use those triggers? So that's what this video is covering, parameters. So let's just dive right into it. We're going to go to the game that we made last time. Oh, it looks like somebody's already in it. So, alright, let's just get straight to it. So right here we have all these triggers on all these scripts, and we have ways to access their variables. For example, in the initialize script, it's just when game starts, and we have a lot of initialization that happens. So now we talked about how triggers will go off whenever that event happens in the game. So for example, when the player joins, this script is going to be run. But how do you manage the specific player that is gotten or that joins the game? Well, that's where parameters come into play. When you have a trigger, it comes with some parameters. So if you go to mod.io's editor and you go ahead and put this trigger in for player joins, you're going to see that the trigger you get is get triggering player. So this is your way of accessing the triggering player, the player that triggered this event. So for example, if we just create a new script and we make it so that unit collides with wall. So this is when a unit touches a wall, we're gonna have this script go off. So there is a script called unit. Oh, look at that. It's exactly the same name. That's convenient. But when you have this, there is some stuff that I want you to think about. What exactly is happening in this event when a unit touches a wall? Well, a unit is touching a wall. So what are our possible triggers? Well, there is the unit that triggered it, so I guess we can call that a triggering unit. And there's a wall, so I guess we can call that triggering wall. Well, if you were to say triggering wall, you would be half right. There is a way to access the wall's layers, but that's a little bit complicated. Rather, it's not given as a trigger, but we are only given the triggering unit as access. So instead of just a wall and a unit, you're given two ways to access the same unit. So now you might be a little bit confused by what's going on right here because you see get triggering unit and you see get last touching unit. And you might be wondering, what's the difference between those two units? Well, it turns out it's actually the same unit, and there's two ways to access it because both of these triggers fit the event. So mod.io has a list of different triggers that parameters that can go off for each trigger, but some of the really common ones are triggering unit, last touching unit, attacked unit, attacking unit, touched unit, or player, triggering player, and triggering projectile. And so there's a lot of different parameters that you can be given. So now if you have dealt with code in the past, you might know that functions take parameters. Well, that's exactly what's going on here. These are parameters for functions that we may use in our code. So let's try to go ahead and send a chat message that is going to send the player's name out of the triggering unit. So let's just send a chat message to the player, the triggering player, and let's just send you touched a wall whenever a player touches a wall. So you might be wondering, okay, we just said units touch walls, not players. So why exactly is there a player here? Well, if you have a unit, every player owns a unit. Or not every player owns a unit, but every unit is owned by a player. So that means that this unit has an owner, and we can use a function called owner of unit to get the player that owns this triggering unit. So you could put triggering unit here, or you could put last touching unit. They'll both work. I encourage you guys to use last touching unit and run the same code as me, because then you'll see that both work. And as always, everything that I'm doing in the editor, I want you guys to follow along with, just because it's going to help you understand a lot better. So now we have you touched a wall is going to go off for the owner of the triggering unit. So let's just save and apply and see what happens. So now I'm in the game, and we see that there's a fish in the game too. So now oh, look at that. And so now we have this wall, so let's just touch it, and you'll see that it says you touched the wall. Alright, now the fish, go ahead and touch the wall a bunch of times. You'll notice that we are not getting any messages. So that means this code is only running for the triggering player. So that's really important. It's only running for the owner of the triggering unit. It's only sending a chat message to them because we manipulated the scripts to do so. Before, whenever we wanted to test out a trigger, we would just send a chat message to everybody. But now we're able to manipulate it to send the chat message to whoever caused it too. And that's really important because now we're able to see a lot more going on with the code. So now you understand how exactly chat messages can be used to see what triggers do and how to use parameters. Parameters are basically controlled by functions, but I want you guys to try it out on your own. So now we're going to make a new script, and it's going to be called 2 units colliding. So this is going to be 2 units colliding. Here's what I want you guys to do. I want you to try to figure this out. I'm going to write down exactly what I want you to do. I want you to um, find the correct trigger for the job, and I want you also to send a chat message um, to the alright, send a chat message to everyone that says 2 units touched. So this is what I want you guys to do. Go ahead and pause the video and try this out on that script. Alright, so now that you guys have tried that out, let's go ahead and just see what happens. So we're just going to ignore this for now, but basically we're just going to try to find the right trigger. So what exactly is the right trigger? Well, 2 units colliding. It's not going to be called 2 units colliding. It might be called when a unit touches another unit, when a unit starts touching another unit. There's a lot of different names, but let's just see. Unit, touch. I'm just going to write unit and touch. That usually helps. I don't see it anywhere. So let's look at starts maybe. Yeah, unit starts touching another unit. So there's a lot of different names, but you'll see there's 2 parameters given here. There's the touching unit and the touched unit. That's really interesting. So now let's just go ahead and send a chat message. And those of you that did this, you probably already know what's about to happen. But let's just send a chat message to everybody that says 2 units touched. All right. So yeah, while the typing is loading, there we go. Okay, so now we have this. Let's go ahead and save and apply. And then let's go here and play. So there's our fish. Let's go ahead and collide. And boom. You notice it said 2 units touched twice in the chat. So let's go ahead and try this again and see if that happens again. Touched twice. So it's really interesting. This script runs 2 times. See, everything is in groups of 2. So that tells you something. That tells you that the script's players are being this script is running twice for every collision, and that might be a little bit confusing. So let's dive into why that might be happening. So let's print the name of the player that's touching. So instead of writing 2 units touched, I want you guys to try to find out how to print the player's name in the chat. So that's your hint. Find the player's name and just print out the player's name in the chat. And which player? The last touching unit. So don't print out the touched unit, just the touching unit. So go ahead and try that out. Alright, now here's the solution. If you just type player name, something should come up. Yeah, name of player. So name of player, you'll see players blank, so we can go ahead and press that. And there's a function to get the player. Now you might be wondering, how exactly are we getting the player to work? How does this entire thing work where we can just grab the player based on the unit? Well, we're going to talk about that in a second with a hierarchy. But so we have the owner of a unit, and we said that we wanted the touching unit, not the touched. There's no difference that you guys are going to see. Just to spoil the end, there's not going to be any difference between the touching unit or touched. It's just that Madara does a really special thing, and I'm about to show you what it does. So now when I press play, you see it's run twice, but touching unit is Defishy the first time, and the second time it's me. So that means that whenever you run the script, it's going to make the touching unit 1 unit, and the other unit's the touch unit, and then it's going to swap them and then run the script again. So that tells you maybe whenever you're programming this script, you need to be careful because you can't just, for example, you want to increase the score once of two players that touch, you can't increase both of their scores because then they're going to have 2 points every time they collide. And that's going to be a problem. But as you can see, if it runs twice, that also is probably helpful for some people for certain scenarios, such as when you want a specific order of touching. So that's how this trigger works. Now let's talk about how exactly you can grab owners of touching units and things like that. So let's just open up a dialog message to show you guys. So you guys don't need to know what this dialog thing is. I'm just opening it up to write stuff. But now let's just talk about this. So there's a hierarchy with 4 types. There are player types, there are unit types, uh, there are item types, and projectile types. So these are the 4 types in the hierarchy. And here's what they do. Basically, every type has an owner. So a projectile is owned by an item. And this is always true. There's always going to be some item that owns a projectile, or the owner is undefined. So it's or undefined. And this is true for all of them. So I'm not going to write or undefined for all of them. Now an item is owned by a unit, and you might be following the pattern. A unit is owned by a player. And now every unit has a type of unit, every player has a type of player, every item has a type of item, every projectile has a type of projectile. And that's basically what these things are on the left. You'll see units, and then there's types of units. So maybe you want a homie unit, maybe you want a brand new unit, we can call it a general or something. Maybe you want an item, maybe a cookie or a box, right? So these are different kinds of items. Projectiles, maybe you want a bullet, maybe you want a grenade. So there's different kinds of projectiles, items, units that you can have, and they always follow this kind of pattern. But this pattern doesn't really make any sense unless you know what context you're using them in. But for example, let's say that I had a triggering projectile, and I wanted to get the player involved. I wanted maybe every time this projectile touches a specific wall, maybe then I want the player to increase their score by 1. So then, in order to get the player from this triggering projectile, you'd have to find the owner of projectile, which is an item, by the way. And then you find the owner of an item, which is a unit. And then you might be following, it's going to be the owner of a unit, which is, as you guessed, a player. So that is how the hierarchy works. So now you're left with this hierarchy, and if you write this in the code, you're going to end up with the player that owns this projectile. And it's a really long trend that gets you to them. But for example, let's try that out. So let's make a brand new script, and let's just get a random projectile. So projectile touches wall. So this is not going to do anything. We're just going to try to get that projectile and then write a chat message that says the player's name to that player. So projectile and then touches wall right here. So now let's just send a chat message, and right here we want to send it to the triggering player, or the player that owns the triggering projectile, right? So now let's just call this hello for now. So every time they're just going to be sent. Now how do we get them? Well, we said that every player owns a unit, but then every unit owns an item. So then let's look for item, owner of item right here. And every item owns a projectile. So now you're going to be left with projectile. Alright. Owner or source unit of projectile. Source item. Okay, so I don't know why Mod.io did this, but instead of saying owner of projectile, they call it source item of projectile. So it's a little bit off the trend of the other things, but if you guys were looking for this one and you couldn't find it, it's because it's called source item of projectile. So it's the same thing, it's owner of a projectile. They just named it differently. And then you just take the triggering projectile. So now you see this gigantic trend of functions. So function, parameter. And if you guys were unfamiliar with the terms I'm using, a function and a parameter. Basically, a function, you can think of it as a factory. When you give it some input, it gives you output. So a parameter is the name that programmers give to inputs for functions. So that's basically, you can give a function another function, but eventually you have to give one of the functions a parameter. So that's the parameter triggering projectile, which is put into a function, put in a function, put in a function. And now let's see what happens. So now we're in the game, and we say that a projectile touches a wall, and that's gonna say hello. So this is a little bit brand new, but let's just add a projectile real quick, and let's just make it a an explosive projectile for now. So explosive bullet, and we'll just call it my projectile. And yeah, so you guys can follow along with this. We're just gonna give it a simple style sheet. We'll just give it yellow bullet circle, and we're gonna make the lifespan super long just so that we can play around with it for now. 100,000. So these are in milliseconds. So 100,000 means 100 seconds. So now we have my projectile, and you guys, this might be a little bit advanced, but what we're gonna do real quick is every time two units collide, we're just gonna create a projectile. So go ahead and go to the create projectile position inside of our units colliding, and you're gonna put my projectile. So create my projectile at position, entity position. All right. So there's a lot of stuff going on. So we're creating my projectile at a position, and we're applying 0 velocity at 0 radians. So the reason that there's velocity in radians is maybe you want it to auto-generate a projectile. But position is the hardest part here. What you want to do is you want to do entity position. I want you guys to try to figure out which position we're putting this at. All right. So now that you're here, you might look inside this script, and you'll see a lot of different things you can put here. You can put triggering units, you can put items, and you can put projectiles. But what we have in this script is two parameters. We have access to only two parameters, which is triggering unit and triggering or touching unit and touched unit. So either one of these will work, but we're going to use touching unit. It doesn't matter though. You guys can use touch if you would like. And so now let's just save and apply. And so now this is going to be a set of instructions. So now what's going to happen is we're going to collide with the fish, and it should create two projectiles because we had two different the script runs twice. So remember that script is going to run twice. And now the fish is going to make that projectile touch a wall. So let's see what happens. You see that nothing happened. And you might be a little bit confused now because what we said is that every projectile has an owner. But I also said that projectiles can be undefined, and that's exactly what's happening here. The projectiles have no owner because we just created them arbitrarily with the code. That's why it's really tricky to do programming for certain types of hierarchies because you might get confused as to why something's not working. But the thing is, you might notice we put source item of projectile. There's no item to be the source, so that part becomes undefined. Therefore, everything else doesn't work and nobody sent the message. But I hope that this video helps you guys understand parameters and triggers, and go ahead and try the next video where there's some practice problems for you guys.